Hollywood directors and American fiction writers have colored or portrayed Germany in 1914 with the same paint that they used to describe Hitler's Germany of 1934. Those were two different times that boasted distinctly different German governments. Of course, Germany lost both World War I and World War II, and as we know, the victors write the histories. But popular culture has a way of noting certain historical events and then exploiting them in the eyes of consumers of movies and TV shows. While there has been a merging of fiction and real history, stereotypes and overgeneralizations remain issues for anyone seeking a clearer understanding of what led to the deaths of between 50 and 80 million people. On today's episode of The Vanntage Point, we won't have time to address all those issues, but we'll look at 5 events that are shrouded in the mist of time leading up to World War II. I hope you'll join me. American perceptions of the world wars are partially products of what's shown in movies, TV shows, and the popular media. Germans, for example, are typically shown as stupid, evil, aggressive, and almost always bad, which the Nazis certainly were most of the time. The Nazis, and Hitler specifically, were driven by a quest for power and a need for revenge over the punitive measures, including disarmament and paying reparations, that were stressed in the Treaty of Versailles that was signed on June 28, 1919. That events lead us to the first oddity that may not be clear to many Americans. Number 1. The United States Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles because it was to be managed by the League of Nations, which was an international body proposed by President Woodrow Wilson. While the treaty was not recognized officially by the United States, some of its stipulations appeared in the U.S.-German treaty that was signed in Berlin on August 25, 1921. In other words, the United States had its own treaty with Germany. It didn't even abide by the Treaty of Versailles. At the end of the day, the Senate did not ratify the treaty because it had not approved membership in the League of Nations. President Wilson also refused to incorporate concerns that some senators had in joining an international body that could assert itself over the interests of the United States. Some senators were wisely concerned about approving what they perceived to be a loss of national sovereignty. As you probably know, the League of Nations eventually became the United Nations in the wake of World War II. The U.S. was so supportive of the concept that Truman, President Harry S. Truman that is, convened an international meeting in San Francisco in late April 1945 to draft an official charter for the UN. You might be interested to note that the UN has grown from 51 original members in 1945 to 193 member countries and 2 observing states at present. Number 2, the Treaty of Versailles placed a heavy financial burden on Germany's Weimar Republic, which ran from 1918 after World War I and 1933 in the ascension of Adolf Hitler. That situation made it easy for radical political groups to use the Weimar financial burden as an excuse to gain leverage and power. Such was the case on the streets of Munich and Berlin in the 1920s. A number of those radical organizations were created or became aligned with the National Socialist Workers' Party, or Nazis. They persistently and sometimes violently agitated for change. By the way, the political left in America has used those same kinds of associations. I should say Antifa and BLM for the same purposes. They're not the same associations. They're clearly not out killing people necessarily, although some people did die, come to think of it. The Nazis grew from a small, violent political movement in 1923 when Hitler failed to overthrow the Bavarian government in Munich to the largest political party in the Reichstag, or legislative body, in 1932. Hitler's attempted coup was called the Beer Hall Putsch. Not poochie poochie poochie, come here poochie poochie. No, German word for overthrow, violent overthrow. With Germany reeling from triple-digit inflation and nearly 1 in 4 Germans out of work in 1932, success at the ballot box prompted Hitler's appointment as Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. Hitler still had domestic opposition in certain parts of the fatherland, but he didn't let any crisis go to waste. Say, does that sound familiar to you? I'm thinking of, oh well. On August 2nd, 1934, he effectively became dictator and chose the benign-sounding title of Führer, which doesn't mean dictator, it simply means leader or guide. Number 3, there was a distinct difference in the battlefield morality and ethics between the regular army, or Wehrmacht, and the Schutzstaffel, or SS. That's because the Wehrmacht had traditions and an established power structure when Hitler was appointed as Chancellor and assumed office in 1933. The SS, on the other hand, was a product of various paramilitary groups operating in the Weimar Republic between 1920 and 1929, when it took on a much more active and aggressive posture in domestic affairs after the appointment of Heinrich Himmler as Reichsführer SS. Most of the atrocities and death camps run by the Nazis in the 1930s and World War II were under Himmler and his minions in the SS. Nevertheless, popular media seems to project the atrocities of Hitler and the Nazis onto Germans in World War I and every aspect of military life in World War II. But folks, the morality of the SS was certainly not shared by the established Wehrmacht leadership, who were guided by tradition, not necessarily revenge and hate. Number 4. Most interested observers or viewers will recognize that Nazi Germany depended heavily on domestic and international propaganda that featured imagery showing the greatness of the German man or woman, especially on the battlefield or in athletics. Propaganda minister Dr. Joseph Goebbels was a diminutive man of 5'5" and weighed only about 135 pounds. He'd have been a lightweight in boxing, I guess. But he was a giant in the emerging field of political propaganda. Despite the claims of great strength, stamina, and fighting prowess of the pure Aryan or Teutonic Knight, many of the leaders of the Nazis were tiny or on the smaller size with respect to height. Well, Goering was a little bit on the rotund side, but he was also short. We'll see his height here in just a minute. Depending upon the source, Hitler was either 5'8" or 5'9". Martin Bormann, the overseer of the Berghof and the Obersalzberg complex, was only 5'7". Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe and Vice Chancellor of Germany, was a bit taller at 5'10", but as I said a minute ago, he was quite rotund. He was very round. Lost a lot of weight when he was in prison after World War II. The head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, was only 5'9". In 1934, the SS set a minimum height for recruits at 5'9", but 5'10" was the minimum for SS units assigned to protect Adolf Hitler. Number 5, the propaganda minister was so successful in altering how Germans saw the regime that few citizens had any real knowledge of the atrocities occurring just out of sight. It might be hard to believe for some of us, but our own government used propaganda to sway public and international opinions of the country in the 1930s. For example, the 1936 Olympic Games, which were held in Berlin, provided opportunities for the United States to project images of the greatness of the country, which was, of course, propaganda. The United States was quick to point to the 4 gold medals won by Jesse Owens as a propaganda tool for any number of reasons. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not taking anything away from Jesse Owens, but the USA came in a distant second place with respect to the number of medals won that year. We, the United States, won 57 medals, but Germany took 101. Germany had 38 gold medals, and we had 24. And of course, 4 of those went to Jesse Owens. So that means only 20 gold medals are won by other Americans. That's pretty pathetic, really. Now, I'm sure in Germany the propaganda was about the overall greatness of the Aryan athlete, while in the United States it was about the greatness of the country. Well, folks, that's about all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed our brief look at some of the oddities hidden in the events that happened on the way to the World War II in Europe. Until I see you again, may the good Lord bless and keep you. May He make His face shine on you and give you peace. Bye-bye.